Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. I am Abe with MysticGenMara.com, a small town mystic from the middle of Idaho. And tonight, whenever you happen to be seeing this, I would like to do a simple book review. I've talked about this book, my microphone's being weird, a lot over the course of this channel. It's probably one of my favorite heretical or apocryphal, generally considered heretical books of the Bible, and that is the Book of Enoch. So this one actually is called the Books of Enoch because when you first start out, most people are going to run into the R.H. Charles version, which is the original, the Ethiopian book, which is this top one. But there's actually 3 different books that all fall under the banner of the Book of Enoch. There's the Ethiopian book, the one generally most commonly, I believe, thought of. Then there's the Book of Secrets of Enoch, and then there's the Hebrew Book of Enoch. And this one doesn't have all the notes that I would like it to have. This one's just the collection of the works. But the Ethiopian book is broken into basic chapters. Some of them are titled like the parables, a fragment of the Book of Noah. And I like the fact that whoever compiled this one actually would put notes in there that these were not the completed sections, these are fragments. There is the Book of Heavenly Luminaries, the Dream Visions, Book of Exhortation, and Promised Blessings for the Righteous, End of the Malediction and the Woe for Sinners. That's just in the first part of Enoch in the Ethiopian. The second one is just broken up by verses, basically. The third has the revelation of Metatron. Metatron is who Enoch ascends to becoming. And we'll take a peek at that one. I had it bookmarked, but I bumped my book and all my bookmarks fell out. That's always special. But in the revelation of Metatron, Ishmael ascends to heaven to behold the vision of the Merkabah and is given into the charge of Metatron, and Enoch walked with God. He was not, for God took him. Rabbi Ishmael states, when I ascended into the high to behold the vision of the Merkabah and entered the 6 halls, one within the other, as soon as I reached the door of the 7th, I stood in prayer before the Holy One, blessed be he, and lifting up my eyes on high towards the divine majesty. It goes on to hit through his prayer through the seraphims and the different choirs that may be associated. It's not super, that section's not super detailed about that. Obviously it was written several hundred if not thousands of years ago now, but it's a really interesting resource. And if you read it just from the standards of a book, and I say verses, they're broken into verses, but their verses are there's like 3 in each chapter, maybe 5 in some of them. They're super small. But to sit down and actually read this book gives you an entirely different perspective on the pre-flood aspect, especially if you look at it from the Christian perspective. And there's aspects to the Book of Enoch that there's a reason that they took it out of the canonized Bible in the Catholic-based churches, which pretty much everything starting from 300 to 600 AD forward is from that time period. Even though in the first few compilations of the Bible between 600 and I want to say 1200 AD, the Book of Enoch was actually in and out through that whole time. It wasn't deemed heretical until around 12. Don't quote me on those dates. I'm not do not have those exact numbers. But when you start to look through it, you start to see why it was pulled. There is a lot in here that talks about supernatural beings interacting with humans. It's not super defined on a lot of it, but it also goes into a little bit more detail. Not a lot, again, but enough of the Nephilim, the Watchers, who fell, who didn't, why they fell, things like that. But it's a different way of looking at that time period. It's not set up just to be a book of rules and regulations. There's like the term the elect one in this first one is talking about generally Enoch or about spiritual seekers. There's a little bit of confusion depending on which author you read as to what that actually means. But then they talk about I saw the angels of punishment abiding there in one of the lower realms, preparing all the instruments of Satan I asked the angel of peace who went with me, for whom are they preparing these instruments? He said, they prepare them for the kings and the mighty of this earth, that they may thereby be destroyed. After this, the righteous and the elect one shall cause the house of congregation to appear. Henceforth, they shall be no more hindered in the name of the Lord of spirits. So it's talking about like Revelation type stuff. It's actually kind of a fun, I say that loosely, it's a fun read just from the fact of we've been taught very specific things, especially if you're raised in a Christian household, about the pre-flood. The problem is all of the pre-flood books, and it's not really a problem, it's just more of a be aware of this thing. All of the pre-flood books were written by one person, but they were written 2,000 years or so, give or take, after the last flood. So, but if you go through here, there's some interesting tiebacks to, it alludes to things that happened pre-flood, but if you believe the lore around this book, the lore says that this book was basically inspired, or if not brought over on like Noah's Ark type thing. So we're talking about a pretty ancient book if you're going to be specifically accurate on that. We'll go to one of the fragments of the Book of Noah just for reference there, if I can find it. There, maybe. What chapter is that supposed to be? 60. Well, it helps if they have the right page numbers attached, which they don't. That's funny. But there's sections in here that talk about, in the year 500, in the 7th month, on the 14th day of the month of the life of Enoch, in the parable, I saw how a mighty quaking made the heaven of heavens to quake, and the host of the Most High, and the angels, and 1,000 thousands, and 10,000s times 10,000s, were disquieted with a great disquiet. There's a lot of the same words. That's part of the... I'm sure if you read it in the original language, there's a poetic flow to this. When you read it through the translation, not so poetic. And the head of the days sat on the throne of his glory, and the angels and the righteous stood around him, and a great trembling seized me, saying Enoch, and fear took hold of me, and my loins gave way, and I dissolved were my reins, and I fell upon my face. Michael sent another angel from among the holy ones, raised me up where he had raised up my spirit, returned, for I had not been able to endure the look of this host, and the commotion and the quaking of heaven. So this is him talking about Noah, right? Part of it is Noah, but it's like Noah's hearing it from Enoch, or Enoch's hearing it from Noah. It's a little discombobulated because it's only a fragment of the text, because most of the heretical book of Noah, what little does remain is from here. There's not a lot. I haven't found yet. There might be something I haven't seen yet. That's always a possibility. Of an actual full text. I mean, they're still deciphering part of the Don Quixote scriptures and Dead Sea Scrolls, so who knows what they might find eventually, but this is just a small section of it. But it talks about what happens before the flood. Then it works into back to Enoch's talking. It's just an interesting, like I said, I had bookmarks, but they fell out, so that's where we're at. But it does have sections and talks about the Nephilim in here as well. Talks about the Watchers and what they did, and it's kind of interesting because the Watchers were never painted as great. Not that they were supposed to be, but it was interesting how they're painted as pretty much neutral figures. They weren't supposed to be good, bad, and different. They're not angels. That's very clear in here. They are beings, but they're never referenced as angels in the Book of Enoch. That's one of those things that's been misinterpreted. The Watchers were literally just to observe. They weren't meant to talk. They weren't meant to interact. That's where they fell. And there's been a lot of lore around the Nephilim that comes out of that, and a lot of it is bupkis, but they do talk a little bit about that in here. But it's an interesting work. At the end of the earth I saw 12 portals opened all quarters of heaven, from where the winds go forth and blow over the earth. 3 of them are open to the face, i.e. the east, of heaven, and 3 in the west, 3 on the right, which is the south of heaven, and 3 on the left. And the 3 are those of the east, 3 are of the north, 3 are of the south, 3 of the west. Through 4 of these comes the winds of blessing and prosperity, and from those 8 come hurtful winds when they are sent. They bring destruction on all earth, and upon it, and on it, and all those who dwell thereon, and everything which is in the water and on the land. So, here kind of is describing not just terrestrial land, but celestial as well. And that's where some of the stuff, like I said, he describes it because if the lore is to be believed, again, the Bible says that Enoch was taken without seeing death. Historical record, what little of it is there is from that time period, because it was pre the last flood, also references that. He is in almost every culture worldwide as far as religion. If they have an attachment to Abraham, this is part of their culture. But the other thing is if you look at some other groups, there's always this aspect of a human being close to God, walking with the gods, however, that is taken and becomes like them, but not one of them. So it's not just one culture has this, which is kind of cool. Then there's a section where he's in heaven, and the angel said to me, "Observe, Enoch, these heavenly tables, read what is written, and mark every individual fact." I observed the heavenly tables, and read everything which was written thereon, and understood everything, and read the book of all deeds of all mankind, and all the children of the flesh that shall be upon the earth to the remotest generations. He was shown the book, basically the book of life, so it shows everything, down to the current day. Can you imagine what Enoch was thinking when he got to our time period? And forthwith I blessed the great Lord of kings of glory forever, in that he made all the works of this world, and I extolled the Lord because of his patience, and blessed him because of the children of men. Blessed is the man who dies in righteousness and goodness, concerning whom there is no book of unrighteousness written, and against whom no day of judgment shall be found. And the 7 holy ones brought me and placed me on the earth before the door of my house, and said to me, "Declare everything to thy son Methuselah, and show all thy children that no flesh is righteous in the sight of the Lord, for he is their creator. 1 year will leave thee with thy son, till thou givest thy last commands, and thou mayest teach thy children, and record it for them, and testify to all children. And in the 2nd year they shall take thee from their midst." So this is saying, basically, whatever you're seeing here, Enoch, when you get done, you go back to earth, dropping you off at your house, tell everybody what you've seen, specifically your child. Methuselah, if you go by the biblical practice, is the oldest living human being ever. I think it was like 968 years or 969 years, something like that. Almost 1,000 years, I couldn't imagine. But Enoch was to tell him, what he saw, what was going on, and verbally pass it down through the generations, because it was meant as a message for that time, but all times. Because Enoch didn't just see 1 or 2 things, he saw all of it. And if you look at things from our perspective today, that adds to the complexity of what it was that was being passed on, because we understand now that there's the concept of the multiverse. Every decision splits your future. And so when you add that into the mix, this book becomes a lot more complex from just a simple read to what exactly did Enoch know? There's a reason that when we look at Metatron, he is a keeper of knowledge and wisdom, because that's where that power source is. He knows everything because he was able to read and understand it all. Because not everyone who has had visions can read the books and understand them, but when you read through this text, Enoch was given the gift of discernment and could read every book in heaven and know exactly what it meant and how far-reaching it was. Could not imagine being able to retain that much information. And that's just in the first book. So let's bounce into the 2nd book of Enoch, which is the Secrets. Where'd that page go? This is not a long book. This particular, the way this one's set up, it's only 150 pages or something, 160. Oh, not even that many, 120. The pages are gigantic, so each, it's, a good-sized book. But when we get into the 2nd book, which is the book of the Secrets of Enoch, There was a wise man, a great artificer, and the Lord conceived love for him and received him, that he should behold the uppermost dwellings and be an eyewitness of the wise and great and inconceivable and immutable realm of God Almighty, of the very wonderful and glorious and bright and many-eyed station of the Lord's servants, and of the inaccessible throne of the Lord itself, and of the degrees and manifestation of the incorporeal hosts, and of the ineffable ministrations of the multitude of the elements, and the various apparitions and inexpressible singing of the host of the cherubim with boundless light. That's the first sentence of the second book. But it goes through and talks about Methuselah. It talks, and some of these, because they're not all completed, you'll have fragments in here or sentences that just disappear because that section was corrupted at some point. But in here we get into the very specific aspects of what Enoch was experiencing. Then the element of the sun called the phoenixes and the Chalkidri break into song. Therefore every bird flutters with its own wings, rejoicing in the giver of light. There's a section in here. It says, in the midst of heaven I saw the armed soldiers serving the Lord with tympana and organs, and with incessant voice, with sweet and incessant voices, and various singing which was impossible to describe, and which astonishes every mind. Like, trying to describe what he saw would be impossible in my mind. But we'll bounce through here, get into the third book. The third book is the Hebrew Book of Enoch. So this is the one that would be in some of the older texts in the Talmud, I believe. Don't quote me on that. And that's where we get into Ishmael seeing him. And then Metatron has 70 names. God calls him youth. This is where we actually start to understand that Enoch became Metatron, was in the Jewish section of this. It's not the same as how you would think it would happen, but it is pretty cool. The highest classes of angels make inquiries about Rabbi Ishmael, which are answered by Metatron himself, which Metatron responds with. God calls Metatron youth because he's still young, but he's super important. In chapter 4 is when Metatron is identical with Enoch, who is translated to heaven at the time of the Great Deluge. So that's where you start to make the connections, because prior to that, in this particular book, Metatron was mentioned separately. But they keep talking about how Metatron and Enoch are the same, and some of the things that Enoch had seen. Then Metatron transforms into fire. There is the ascension of Moses, because there are some beliefs that Moses, when he ascended after he died, was seen by Enoch. I can't remember who else. Enoch was one of the two people there. This is talking about when Enoch, as the Metatron, came in to help assist in that transformation. But there's only a fragment of that section in here. There's some other... and I like how they phrase this. Possible addition of fragment B, meaning it may have just been made up by a previous author. So take that section with a grain of salt. The order of ranks of angels and the homage received by the higher ranks from the lower ones. And then they go through the angels of the first heaven, the prince of the first heaven, the prince of the second heaven, the prince of the third, fourth, fifth, sixth, the prince of the seven heavens, and the 72 princes of the kingdoms. And then you have the doorkeepers, and they go through the different names. Some of these names I could not even imagine how to say. And when he sees Zihanparia, like I said, the names are not easy to say. But these are the names of the different angels. Rikbiel, the prince of the wheels of the Merkaba, the surrounding of the Merkaba, the commotion among the angelic hosts at the time of Kedusha. So there's a lot of interesting phrases in here, and if you've read a lot of Kabbalah or Golden Dawn works, you'll notice there's several phrases in this text that come up in those texts. So if you're a student of random old books and you're kind of curious about where this Metatron comes from, because I've talked about him and I had a whole video about him, and you're curious about some of the other histories and some of the little quirks as to why it may have been taken out, It's actually a pretty good read, even if you're reading it just from the fact of, I will disprove why it should never have been labeled a book of the Bible. That's fine. If you want to read it as a historical reference, it's actually a good source of that as well. But I do really super recommend this particular set, so you get all three in one. It's not super expensive. But if you've already read it, I'm curious to know what your thoughts are. It's a fun book, as long as you don't take it too seriously. Personal opinion, the reason it was taken out of the Bible originally was because it references things as the Watchers, a human becoming angelic, humans physically going to heaven versus the spirit concept that they talk about later. And I think they also don't like it because it talks very heavily about supernatural things being done with humans, to humans, and by humans. So it's not like a simple, oh, it was just because Enoch was who he was. No, there's a little different vibe going on when you read through this book. So if you're interested, you can check it out. I'll have a link in the description for you if you're curious. Like I said, let me know what your thoughts are on it. If it's just a straight up book you don't agree with, you can say that as long as it's respectful. I'm just kind of curious as to what other people's opinions are. With that, I will let you guys go. Didn't mean to have this one go so long. Have a great rest of your evening, and I will see you in the next video.